The doors of the great hall opened, and 1,000 alien eyes turned to me at once, and every single one of them wanted me dead. I could feel it, like heat on my skin. I walked forward anyway, because that is what humans do. We walk forward. My name is Daniel Hale. For 30 years, my people fought the Vitheri Dominion across half the galaxy, and 3 days ago, the Dominion surrendered. Now I stood in their royal hall, on their throne world, wearing my old gray uniform among nobles dressed in light itself. Their crests glowed above their heads like crowns of living fire, blue and gold and silver, pulsing with pride even in defeat. The hall was so large that clouds formed near the ceiling. Everything about the place was built to make a visitor feel small. I did not feel small. I felt tired. The emperor sat on a throne carved from a single black stone, and his crest burned brighter than all the others. When he spoke, his voice rolled through the hall like slow thunder. He said, "Champion of Earth, by the terms of cession, the Dominion offers you first choice of its treasures. Choose your prize, and let the old law be satisfied." That was the ritual. The choosing. It was older than my entire species. When the Dominion lost a war, which had not happened in 10,000 years, the winner's greatest soldier was allowed to claim anything from the royal court. A warship, a crown, a world, even the hand of a royal daughter. It was their way of admitting defeat with ceremony instead of shame, and my government had ordered me to play along, smile, take something shiny, and come home so the peace treaty could be signed. I had not wanted to come. I had told my admiral that I did not fight for prizes. She had told me that if I refused, the hardliners in the Dominion would call the surrender invalid, and the war would start again. So here I was, the most decorated soldier of a war I hated, walking down a mirror-bright floor to pick a trophy. A court official glided beside me, a thin Vitheri with a silver crest and a voice like oil. He pointed out the treasures with long fingers. "Here, champion, the blade of the first dawn, carried by 9 emperors. There, champion, the deed to the shipyards of Vesk, the finest in the galaxy. And there, champion," he said, lowering his voice with pride, "the daughters of the emperor himself." 8 princesses stood on a raised platform of white stone. I will not pretend they were not beautiful. They were tall and graceful, and their crests glowed in perfect royal gold, and each one looked at me with a calm, practiced smile. They had been trained for this moment. Their eyes measured me the way a merchant measures a customer. I had seen that look across a negotiation table for 30 years. I had seen it right before ambushes. Every smile in that hall was a move in a game. I was about to point at the shipyard deed, take my paper, and go home. That was the plan. Then I saw her. At the far edge of the hall, half hidden behind a pillar, stood a figure in plain gray cloth. No jewels, no guards, no glow. Where every other Vitheri in that hall carried a burning crest above their head, hers was simply absent. There was nothing there at all. She stood with her shoulders curved inward, like someone trying to take up less space in the universe, and she was watching the ceremony the way a child watches a party through a window. I stopped walking. The whole hall noticed. 1,000 quiet conversations died at once. "Who is that?" I asked. The official followed my gaze, and something happened to his face that I had never seen a Vitheri do before. He flinched. Just for a moment, but I caught it. "That is no one of consequence, champion," he said. "Please, the treasures are this way." No one of consequence. I have heard many lies in my life, but the worst ones are the lies people believe themselves. He was not hiding her from me. He had simply been taught, his entire life, that she did not count. Something in my chest went very still and very cold. I know that feeling. It is the feeling I get right before I make a decision that my commanding officers will hate. I turned and walked toward the pillar. The official hurried after me, whispering fast, "Champion, please, that is the 9th daughter. She is flawed. She carries no crest. She has no ancestor's light, no standing, no soul as we understand it. Choosing her would insult the emperor beyond repair. Champion, I beg you." Every step I took made the silence in the hall deeper. The 8 princesses on the platform had stopped smiling. The emperor had risen halfway from his throne. Guards' hands drifted toward weapons they were not allowed to use, and the young woman in gray watched me come toward her with growing horror, pressing her back against the pillar as if she could dissolve into the stone. Up close, I could see she was younger than the others. Her skin had the same faint silver sheen as her sisters, but where their eyes were sharp and cold, hers were wide and stunned and afraid. Not afraid the way soldiers are afraid. Afraid the way people are afraid when they have never once, in their entire life, been the center of attention, and suddenly the whole world is looking at them. "What is your name?" I asked her. She stared at me. Her mouth moved twice before sound came out. "Sajara," she whispered. "My name is Sajara." I turned to face the throne. My voice is not beautiful, but 30 years of shouting across battlefields has made it carry. I said, "I choose her. I choose Sajara. That is my prize, and the law is satisfied." For one full second, the hall was so quiet I could hear the clouds moving near the ceiling. Then it broke. 1,000 voices at once. Nobles shouting in 3 languages. The 8 princesses staring at me with open shock, and one of them, I noticed, with something that looked strangely like relief. The oily official had gone pale silver, and the emperor's crest flared so bright it hurt to look at, which I later learned is what happens when a Vitheri is angrier than words can hold. He thundered, "Champion, you shame this house. You pass over gold and choose ash. Is this Earth's mockery of us in our defeat?" I looked him in the eye, this ancient ruler who had spent 30 years sending fleets to burn human colonies, including the one where my little sister Lucy had lived, and I gave him the only true answer I had. "Your treasures were offered with pride," I said. "I am not interested in your pride. The law says I choose. I have chosen. The old law was the old law. 10,000 years of tradition trapped him in front of his own court. He could not refuse without breaking the very ceremony that protected his surrender. His crest burned, and then, slowly, it dimmed, and he sat back down, and he said the ritual words in a voice like breaking stone. "The choice is made. The law is satisfied. Take your prize and go." He did not look at his daughter even once, not to say goodbye, not in anger, nothing. She had lived her whole life in his palace, and he let her be carried off by his greatest enemy without a single glance, and I think that told me more about the Vitheri dominion than 30 years of war ever had. Guards escorted us out through a side passage, moving fast, as if the court wanted the embarrassment gone before the heir could remember it. Sajara walked 3 steps behind me the entire way with her head down. She did not speak. She did not cry. She moved like someone walking to their own funeral, calm in the way that is worse than tears. My shuttle sat in the docking bay, small and ugly and human among the sleek Dominion ships. My pilot, a sharp young woman named Ellen Price, took one look at the alien princess in gray, and then at my face, and wisely decided to ask absolutely nothing. We lifted off. Through the window, the throne world fell away below us, all silver towers and burning lights, and I felt 30 years of war finally, truly, end. That was when Sajara moved. She came forward from the back of the cabin, knelt down on the metal floor in front of my seat, bowed her head so low her forehead nearly touched the deck, and spoke for only the 2nd time since I had met her. Her voice was steady. That was the terrible part. It was completely steady. She said, "I am ready, champion. I only ask that it be quick. How do you wish me to die?" The words did not make sense to me at first. I actually asked her to repeat them, and she did, patiently, kindly even, as if explaining something simple to a slow student. She thought I had chosen her for execution. She thought the human champion had picked the worthless daughter so that Earth could kill a princess without insulting the Dominion, because everyone knew the 9th daughter did not matter. She had walked out of that hall believing she was going to her death, and she had not fought, had not begged, had not run, because her own family had spent her entire life teaching her that this was all she was for. I sat there in that shuttle seat, a man who had faced plasma fire and boarding actions and things in the dark between stars, and for a long moment I could not speak at all. Then I leaned forward, and I did something no one had apparently ever done to her before. I offered her my hand to help her up off the floor. "Nobody is dying," I said. "Not today, not by my order, not ever. Get up, please. In my house, nobody kneels." She looked at my open hand as if it were a puzzle written in a language she had never been taught. Slowly, carefully, as though the floor might vanish beneath her, she took it and rose to her feet. "Then what am I for?" she asked quietly. And I realized I did not have an answer. I had chosen her out of anger at a room full of cruelty, without a plan, without permission, and now a princess of a fallen empire was standing in my shuttle, holding my hand, asking me what her life was for. "Whatever you want," I said finally. "That is the whole point. Whatever you want." She did not understand. I could see it in her eyes. Those words simply did not fit anywhere inside the world she knew. But the shuttle flew on toward the human fleet, and behind us, though neither of us knew it yet, the Dominion court was already whispering, already scheming, already afraid, because I had not taken a treasure from them at all. I had taken a secret, and some secrets, once they leave the palace, can bring an empire down. 6 weeks later, I was standing in the mud of a frontier world called Kestrel's Landing, watching an alien princess try to taste my breakfast for poison, and wondering how my life had come to this. Let me explain the mud first. After the ceremony, my government did not know what to do with me. I had technically followed orders, technically kept the peace, and technically caused the biggest diplomatic headache in human history, all in the same afternoon. So they did what militaries always do with inconvenient heroes. They promoted me sideways and shipped me somewhere far away. Kestrel's Landing was a farming colony on the edge of human space, 40,000 settlers, one small garrison, and weather that could not decide between rain and more rain. I was made garrison commander, which sounded important and meant that I spent my days fixing generators and settling arguments about fence lines. Sajara came with me, because there was nowhere else for her to go, and that is when I learned that unteaching a lifetime takes longer than teaching one. She would not use furniture. The first week, I found her sleeping on the floor beside her perfectly good bed, because in the palace, the floor was where she belonged. She stood whenever I entered a room, and would not sit until I did. She tried to walk 3 steps behind me everywhere, which caused a small crisis at the colony market when I turned a corner and lost her, and found her 10 minutes later standing frozen exactly where I had last been visible, waiting, because she had not been given permission to move. The poison tasting was the worst of it. Every meal, she would quietly reach over, take a small piece of my food, and eat it first, then wait, watching her own hands, counting her own heartbeats. In the palace, that had been one of her duties. The worthless daughter made a convenient shield. When I finally understood what she was doing, I put my fork down and said, "No one is poisoning anyone here, and even if they were, I would rather be poisoned than watch you do that one more time." She looked at me with those wide silver eyes and said, "Then who will protect you?" And I said, "We will protect each other. That is how it works here." And she went very quiet for the rest of the meal, turning that sentence over and over like a strange coin she had found on the ground. Bit by bit, rule by rule, we rebuilt her world. In my house, nobody kneels. In my house, you eat when you are hungry, not when you are permitted. In my house, doors are for everyone, chairs are for everyone, and questions are never punished. That last one changed everything, because it turned out that Sajara was made of questions. She had just spent 26 years being taught that asking them was a crime. Once the questions started, they never stopped. Why do humans shake hands? Why do humans name their ships after old gods and their children after grandmothers? Why does Sergeant Ben Carter shout at the supply computer when shouting cannot fix software? Why do humans laugh at misfortune? And why does laughing at it make it hurt less? And can anyone learn that, or only humans? I answered what I could. For the rest, I gave her access to the colony's library network, and that was like putting a match to dry grass. She read engineering manuals the way other people read adventure stories. She finished the entire human history archive in 9 days and came to me deeply troubled, asking how a species that had done such terrible things to itself could also be so kind to strangers. And I told her the honest answer, which is that we are both things at once, and the fight between them never ends, and every human generation has to win it again. She thought about that for a long time. Then she said, "In the Dominion, nothing is ever both things at once," and it was not until much later that I understood how much she was telling me in that one sentence. The colonists took longer to warm to her than the library did. I understood why. Nearly every family on Kestrel's Landing had lost someone in the war. When the settlers saw a Vitheri walking their streets, even a small, quiet one in plain gray clothes, they saw 30 years of grief wearing silver skin. Nobody was cruel. Kestrel folk were too decent for that. But doors closed politely. Market stalls served her in silence, and children were called inside when she passed. Sajara never complained. She had spent her life being invisible in a palace. Being invisible in a village was, she told me once, at least warmer. The thing that changed it all was the water. Kestrel's Landing had one water reclamation plant, old when it was installed, and dying by the time I arrived. It wheezed, it leaked, and one gray morning in our 3rd month, it failed completely. 40,000 people, and the reserve tanks held 9 days of water. The colony engineer, a stubborn, good-hearted man named Harry Webb, worked around the clock, but the plant needed parts that were 4 months away by supply ship. I sent the distress call and started planning rationing, and the whole colony went quiet, with the special fear of people watching a clock. On the 2nd night, I found Sajara in the plant. She had been there for hours. She was standing inside the drained filtration chamber with a lamp, covered in grime, sketching on a portable screen, and when she saw me, she began talking so fast I could barely follow. "The human design pushed water through the filters by force," she said. Vetheri fluid systems did not push, they persuaded. They used pressure spirals to make the water want to go where it should. The plant's broken pumps could not be fixed, but they could be made unnecessary if we reshaped the intake channels and reversed 2 of the settling tanks and trusted her. Harry Webb looked at her sketches for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, "Commander, this is either genius or nonsense, and I do not have the education to know which, but I know we have 7 days of water, so I vote we find out." They worked for 4 days straight, Sajara and Harry, and every settler with a strong back and a welding torch. She did not command anyone. She had no idea how to command anyone. She just explained and asked and thanked people so sincerely for every small task that grown farmers went red in the face. On the 5th morning, we opened the intake valves, and the old plant filled with a sound it had never made before, a low, smooth hum, like something breathing easily after years of being sick. Clean water came through at 112% of the old flow rate. Harry Webb took off his cap, which those who knew him said he had not done indoors in 20 years. The settlers cheered, and Sajara stood there in the middle of it, soaked and filthy and blinking, as 40,000 strangers celebrated something she had made, and I watched her realize, in real time, that she had value. Not value given to her, value that was simply hers. After the water, everything shifted. The market stalls found their voices. Children stopped being called inside and started following her around instead, because she answered their questions as seriously as if they were senators. Old Alice Moore, who had lost 2 sons in the war and had sworn in public that no Vitheri would ever cross her doorstep, appeared at our quarters one evening with a fruit pie, thrust it into Sajara's hands, said, "You fixed my grandson's water. That is the end of the matter," and marched off before anyone could reply. Sajara held that pie like a holy object. She asked me if she was allowed to feel this happy. That is a real question she asked me. I told her happiness did not require a permit, and she nodded solemnly and wrote it down. She had started writing down human rules. Her notebook is a document I would defend with my life. I should be honest about something else, because this is my story, and lying in it would be pointless. Somewhere in those months, between the questions and the pie and the sound of her laughing for the first time, which happened at one of Ben Carter's terrible jokes and sounded like wind chimes and stopped the entire mess hall, I stopped thinking of Cesara as a responsibility I had picked up in a moment of anger. I am a soldier. I notice where people are in a room, and I noticed that whenever she was in the room, I knew exactly where, all the time, without trying. I did not say anything about it. I am brave in most categories, and a complete coward in exactly one. The seasons on Kestrel's Landing taught her things the library could not. Her first thunderstorm, she stood at the window for 2 hours, and when I asked what she was doing, she said the palace had climate control in every corridor, and she had never once in her life heard the sky have an opinion. After that, she went out in every storm. The settlers got used to the sight of the alien princess standing in the middle of the muddy square in the pouring rain with her face turned up, grinning like a lunatic. And honestly, on Kestrel's Landing, that is how you know someone has decided to stay. Then there was the Harvest Festival, which I mention because it nearly ended me. Kestrel folk work hard for 11 months, and then hold one festival so loud it can probably be heard from orbit. There is music, real music, played badly and joyfully on instruments people build in their barns, and there is dancing that follows no known system of rules. Cesara had read about human music. Reading about it, it turns out, is not the same thing. When the band started, she grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a mark and asked, with genuine alarm, what the sound was doing to her chest, and why she wanted to move, and whether wanting to move was permitted. I told her that on festival night, wanting to move was practically the law, so she danced. She was terrible at it. She danced anyway, for 4 hours, with farmers and children and one deeply confused garrison quartermaster, and somewhere in the middle of it, old Harry Webb leaned over to me and said, "Commander, I fought Vetheri for 11 years, and I am going to need you to explain how I ended up teaching one of them the harvest reel." I told him I had no explanation for any part of my life anymore. He said that seemed about right, and handed me a drink. I also attempted to teach her to drive a ground truck that autumn, which I record here as a warning to future generations. She understood the machine perfectly. She had, in fact, read its complete technical manual in one evening and could explain the engine better than the mechanic who serviced it. What she could not do, at first, was accept that driving involved constant small guesses. "The manual says the safe following distance is 40 meters, she protested. "So why does everyone follow at 15? "Because humans," I said. That is the entire answer. Because humans. She gripped the wheel, muttered something in high court dialect that I suspect was not diplomatic, and learned to guess. Within a month she drove like a Kestrel local, which is to say, considerably worse than the manual recommends, and considerably better than physics should allow. Then the Dominion came back into our lives. It was a diplomatic visit, officially. One sleek silver ship, a courtesy call to confirm the well-being of the champion's prize, all correct and polite under the treaty. The envoy was a tall Vetheri named Lord Vess, with a pale gold crest and a smile that never once reached his eyes. He toured the colony, praised the mud, and asked to see Cesara. I watched her stand in front of him, this creature from her old world, and I watched something remarkable. She did not shrink. Months ago she would have folded herself small and stared at the floor. Now she stood straight, answered his questions in a calm voice, and even, once, corrected his outdated information about the water plant, politely, precisely, in front of witnesses. Lord Vess smiled through all of it, but his crest flickered, and by then I had learned enough about Vetheri to know that flicker meant something was moving behind the smile. They left the next morning with ceremony and gifts. It should have ended there. Except that I have survived 30 years of war by trusting the itch at the back of my neck, and that itch would not stop. So after the silver ship jumped away, I had Ben Carter sweep every room the delegation had entered. In the guest hall, behind a wall panel, tucked where a maintenance drone would never look, we found it. A listening device, Dominion-made, military grade, its tiny power cell rated for 10 years. 10 years. Nobody plants a 10-year device to check on someone's well-being. I stood there in the guest hall, holding that sliver of silver technology, and the truth rearranged itself in front of me. The Dominion court had not been embarrassed to lose Sajara. They had not shrugged and forgotten their worthless ninth daughter. They had crossed half the galaxy, under diplomatic cover, to place a long-term watch on her. You do not watch something worthless, you watch something dangerous. Which meant everything I had been told in that great hall, everything Sajara herself believed about what she was, every cruelty her family had ever fed her, was built on a lie. She was not the least of them. She was something else entirely, something they wanted hidden so badly that they had hidden it even from her. I closed my fist around the device and made a quiet promise to the empty room. I was going to find out what the Dominion feared so much about the gentle person currently teaching the settlers' children to build water spirals out of bottles. I should have been more careful what I promised. Some answers, once you dig them up, start wars all by themselves. Digging into the secrets of an alien empire is not something a frontier garrison commander is supposed to be able to do. Fortunately, I knew a man who owed me money, several apologies, and his life, in that order of importance according to him. His name was Peter Grant, and he worked in naval intelligence, in the department that officially did not exist. We had served together in the early years of the war, back when we were both young enough to think it would be short. I had once carried him 11 kilometers through a collapsed orbital station with a piece of hull in his leg, and he had spent the 20 years since insisting that he would have been fine, and also never once refusing me a favor. I sent him the listening device through a courier I trusted, along with a single question. Why is the Dominion watching a princess they threw away? For 3 weeks, nothing. Then a reply arrived, encrypted so heavily that our colony computer took a full hour to open it, and the first line of Peter's message told me everything about how deep this went. It said, "Dan, burn this after reading," and I am not joking the way I am usually joking. What he sent me was history, not the history the Dominion taught, the 10,000 years of glorious unbroken tradition they recited at ceremonies. The other history, the one buried in sealed archives that human intelligence had captured during the war and never fully understood, because nobody had known what to look for. Peter had known what to look for, because I had told him. Crestless royals. Here is what the Vitheri believe, the official version. The crest above their heads is a living organ that channels the memory of their ancestors. When a Vitheri child is born, the crest connects them to 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom, instinct, and law. It tells them who they are and how to be. A Vitheri with a strong crest never truly stands alone, because every ancestor stands with them. And a child born without a crest is a vessel with nothing inside, empty, soulless. That is what they had told Sajara every day of her life. Here is what the sealed archives said instead, and I had to read it 3 times before I let myself believe it. Crestless births were not random flaws. They followed a pattern, and the pattern was need. Whenever the Vitheri species faced a great turning point, a crisis their traditions could not answer, crestless children began to be born, and always, always into the royal line, closest to power. The archives recorded 7 of them across 10,000 years. Every single one had grown into something extraordinary. Minds that could see around corners tradition could not. One had redesigned Dominion agriculture and ended a famine the priesthood had called an ancestral punishment. One had made peace with a rival species that the ancestral memory insisted must be destroyed. They could do this precisely because they were free. No ancestors whispering the old ways. No 10,000 years of law pressing on every thought. A crestless mind could look at the world and simply ask, what if we did it differently? The Vitheri had a hidden name for them in the oldest records, not the empty ones. The name translated, as closely as Peter's linguists could manage, to the ones who turned the wheel. And every single one of the 7 had died young. Accidents, sudden illnesses. One disappearance during a pilgrimage. The archives recorded the official causes, and then, in the sealed layer beneath, the truth. The priesthood had removed them. Every time. Because a mind free of ancestral memory did not just threaten policies, it threatened the entire idea that the old ways were sacred. The priests called crestless royals a disease of the soul, and cured the empire of them, one quiet death at a time, and rewrote the histories so completely that even the royal family eventually believed the lie about empty vessels. Caesara was the eighth, born as her empire slid into a war it could not win, exactly as the pattern predicted. And the reason she was still alive, Peter's analysts concluded, was bitterly simple. Her father had not loved her enough to protect her, but he had been just superstitious enough not to hand her to the priests, so he had done the middle thing. He had buried her alive in plain sight. No education, no allies, no voice, no name spoken at court. If she was nothing, she was no threat, and if she was no threat, the priests would let her breathe. Then a human soldier walked into the great hall and carried her out of the cage, and now she was on a frontier world, free, learning at a speed that frightened her tutors, with 40,000 humans starting to love her. I sat with that knowledge for 2 days, and it sat in me like a stone, because here was the question I could not escape. Did I tell her? Telling her meant handing her a truth that rewrote her entire life. You were never empty. You were never worthless. You were the most important person in that palace, and everyone who made you feel small was either lying to you or lying to themselves. And by the way, an ancient priesthood has murdered everyone like you who ever lived. That is a heavy gift to give someone who had only just learned that happiness did not require a permit. In the end, the choice was taken out of my hands, in the way important choices usually are, by an ordinary evening. We were on the garrison roof. She liked it up there. Kestrel's Landing has ugly weather and unreasonably beautiful skies, and that night both moons were up, and she was tuning a little device she had built that turned starlight patterns into soft music, because that is a thing she did now, invent impossible objects for fun. And without looking at me, she said, "Daniel, you have been carrying something for 2 days. Your shoulders carry differently when you have bad news. Tell me. In this house, questions are never punished, and neither is truth." My own rules, turned around and aimed at me. There was no way past it, so I told her. All of it. The device in the wall, Peter's archives, the 7 before her, the wheel, the priests, her father's silence, which had been a coward's mercy. I talked for a long time, and she listened without moving, and the little device in her hands kept playing its soft starlight music through all of it, which somehow made it more terrible and more bearable at the same time. When I finished, she was quiet for so long that the moons had moved. Then she said something I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, "All those years, I begged the ancestors to fix me. Every night, I begged the empty air above my head to fill, and the empty air was the gift. Daniel, I mourned a cage." Then she cried, for the first time since I had known her, and I am not going to describe that, because some moments belong to the people in them. I will only say that I stayed, and that at some point her hand found mine, or mine found hers. Honestly, I could not tell you which, and neither of us let go, and neither of us said anything about it, and by then we did not need to. The change in her after that night was not loud. She did not rage or grieve for long. She did something far more dangerous. She got curious about herself. She began testing her own mind the way she had tested the water plant, mapping what she could do. She learned languages in days. She started predicting supply shortages before the computers did, seeing patterns in shipping data the way other people see faces in clouds. She sparred with the garrison soldiers, badly at first, then less badly. Then one memorable morning, she put Ben Carter flat on the training mat with a move she had invented in the shower, and the entire garrison adopted her on the spot as one of their own. They started calling her princess as a rank, not a title. She pretended to disapprove. Her notebook recorded that she did not. And in the evenings, she argued with me about philosophy, about history, about whether my coffee could legally be called a beverage. She had discovered disagreement, the joyful humankind, where two people can build something out of clashing ideas, and she treated every argument like an unwrapped present. I looked forward to those evenings more than I have ever looked forward to anything, and I knew exactly what that meant, and I still said nothing, because bravery in one category does not transfer to another. There was one more thing she did in those months, private and quiet, that I did not learn about until much later, and I set it down here because history should keep it. In the back of her notebook, past the human rules and the water spiral sketches, she wrote 7 letters. One for each of the Crestless who came before her, addressed by the names Peter's linguists had recovered from the sealed archives, names that had not been spoken aloud anywhere in the galaxy for centuries. She told each of them what the Empire had become, and what had been done to them, and that they were not empty, and that they were not forgotten anymore, because she carried them now. 7 letters to the dead, written at a kitchen table on a muddy human world, by the only person alive who understood exactly what their lives had cost. When she finally showed them to me, years afterward, I asked her why she had written to people who could never read them. She said, because for 26 years, I needed one single person to tell me I was real, and no one ever did, and I decided that would end with me. It was also Sajara who first understood what the priesthood was actually doing, months before Peter's intelligence caught up. She had taken to studying the Dominion's public broadcasts, the sermons and proclamations that reached even the frontier relay stations, and one evening she spread the transcripts across our table like a puzzle and showed me the pattern hiding in plain sight. The sermons were changing, she said. Not the words on the surface, which were the same old chants about ancestors and purity. Underneath, in the structure, in the ancient formal registers that only court-raised Vetheri could fully parse, the priests were embedding instructions. Assembly points dressed as pilgrimage routes, loyalty tests dressed as feast days. A count running through 6 consecutive sermons that she recognized as a fleet mobilization sequence because she had read our tactical manuals too, and she now thought in both languages at once. They are not preaching, she told me, pointing at the pattern with a steady finger while my blood went cold. They are broadcasting orders on a channel they believe no one outside the temples can hear. They forgot about me. They always forget about me. It is their oldest mistake, and I am going to make it expensive. I sent her analysis to Peter that same night. His reply came back faster than any message he had ever sent me, and it consisted of one line. Dan, whatever you are feeding her, feed her more, because she just did in one evening what my department has failed to do in 2 years. While we were living those months, the galaxy was moving. The news came in fragments at first, the way distant storms do. Trade ships reported unrest on Dominion worlds. The war reparations were biting, harvests had failed on 3 core planets, and the Dominion's common castes, the billions of low-crest workers who had bled for 30 years in a war their nobles started, were asking questions in public for the first time in living memory. The Emperor's answers satisfied no one, and in that cracking silence, the priesthood grew louder. The ancestors are punishing us, they preached, punishing us for surrender, for weakness, for tolerating abominations. The old ways must return, purer and harder than before. Peter's warnings grew shorter and darker with each message. The hardliner faction was arming. The Emperor was losing his grip, and one name had begun appearing in intercepted priesthood communications with terrifying frequency. A name that had no business being spoken on the throne world at all. Sajara. Because here is the thing the priests understood before anyone else did. Stories travel. Trade crews talk. Somewhere out on the frontier, the tale was spreading through Dominion space in whispers, growing as it went. The discarded princess. The crestless one who was supposed to be nothing, living free among the humans, building wonders, walking without permission, laughing. To the noble castes, it was a scandal, but to the low-crest billions, standing in ration lines under the gaze of their glorious betters, it was becoming something else. It was becoming hope. If the empty one could be more than her place, the whispers asked, then what exactly holds any of us in ours? The priesthood had murdered 7 turners of the wheel to keep that question from ever being asked. The 8th was beyond their reach, protected by a peace treaty and 40,000 stubborn farmers, and every day she lived free, the question grew louder on 100 worlds. Something else reached us in those tense weeks, and at the time we almost missed what it was. A formal gift arrived from the throne world, addressed to the champion's household, sent through proper diplomatic channels with proper diplomatic boredom. It was a ceremonial star chart, the kind Vetheri nobles exchange on anniversaries, etched on a sheet of crystal, beautiful, and as far as anyone could tell, meaningless. The sender was listed as the office of the second daughter. Sara went very still when she read that. Her sister Seneth had not spoken one word to her in 26 years, she told me, not one. And now, with the empire cracking, came a decorative map. She studied that crystal sheet for 2 days, and on the second night she woke me, and her hands were shaking, and she said, "It is not decoration, Daniel, it is the game." When they were both very small, before the court had finished teaching Seneth that her flawed sister did not exist, the two of them had played a secret game with star charts in the nursery, shifting the positions of stars by tiny amounts to spell words in an alphabet they invented together, a child's cipher, known to exactly 2 living beings in the universe. The stars on this chart were wrong, shifted, deliberately. She decoded it at our kitchen table with tears running down her face, because whatever the message said, the message underneath the message was, "I remember you. I remember the game. I have thought about you every day." The decoded words themselves were only 9, and they were these: temples arming, father failing, they fear you most, survive. That was our first true warning, weeks before any intelligence service caught up, delivered through a nursery cipher by a sister who had spent 26 years being silent and could not manage it 1 day longer. Sajara pressed the crystal to her forehead in the Vetheri way and whispered something to it in the high dialect, and then she put it above our door, where it stayed through everything that came after, and where it hangs to this day. When people ask her what the lovely star chart means, she says, "It means my sister was braver than her cage," and lets them wonder. The final message from Peter arrived on a cold morning, marked with the highest emergency cipher we had. It was 3 sentences long. Coup on the throne world. Priesthood has the fleet. Dan, they are coming for her. I stood in the communications room with that message glowing in front of me, and through the window I could see Sajara in the garrison yard, surrounded by settlers' children, teaching them to fold paper gliders, her head thrown back, laughing at a crooked launch, free in the morning light in a way no one in her bloodline had been free for 10,000 years. 3 cruisers had already jumped from Dominion space, running under diplomatic codes. Their course was Kestrel's Landing. The nearest human battle fleet was 8 days away. The wheel was turning, and everyone who wanted to stop it was coming here. 3 warships against 1 farming colony. On paper, it was not a battle, it was an appointment. The cruisers dropped out of jump space at the edge of our system on the 4th morning, still flying diplomatic codes like a polite lie, and their commander sent us a message so courteous it made my teeth ache. He was High Speaker Korath of the renewed faith. He regretted the necessity of this visit, and he required only one small thing before departing in peace. The colony would surrender the creature called Sajara for religious correction, and no one else need be troubled. Religious correction. 7 quiet deaths across 10,000 years, and they still could not say the honest word. I gathered the colony leadership in the town hall that night. Harry Webb, Alice Moore, the elected council, my officers, and Sajara, because the days of deciding things about her without her were long over. I laid it all out. The odds, the timeline, the 8 days until the human fleet could arrive, and Korath's offer. Then Sajara stood up before anyone else could speak and said that she would surrender herself in the morning because she had spent her life being told she was worth nothing, and she would not let 40,000 people prove her family right by paying everything for her. What happened next is my favorite memory of the human species. Alice Moore stood up, all 150 centimeters of her, pointed at Sijara, and said, "Sit down, girl. I lost 2 sons learning what happens when you feed people to tyrants one at a time. You are ours now, and Kestrel folk do not hand over their own." Then Harry Webb stood, and Ben Carter, and the council, and the room came up like a tide, 40 voices, and the town meeting voted, unanimously, with one abstention from a very overwhelmed princess, to refuse. I opened a channel to Korath's flagship and gave the colony's answer in the plainest soldier language I know. I said, "She is not your abomination. She is our engineer. Come and get her." Then we had 4 days to prepare for 3 cruisers, and this is the part where I explain why the Dominion lost the war. The Vetheri fight beautifully. Their doctrine is 10,000 years old, refined by ancestral memory, perfect in its way, and utterly unable to imagine an enemy who does not follow the rules of proper warfare. Their manual for taking a defended colony has 3 chapters: bombard the defenses, land in strength, accept surrender. It does not have a chapter on what to do when the colony refuses to contain any proper defenses to bombard, because everything dangerous is disguised as farming equipment. We had 4 days, 40,000 stubborn people, and a princess whose mind was the single greatest weapon in the system. We used all 3. Sijara did not sleep. She turned the colony's terraforming array, a huge lattice of weather control emitters meant to break up storms, into something else, reprogramming the emitters to focus atmospheric charge into rising columns of superheated air. Not a proper weapon, she explained, eyes bright with exhaustion and invention, just weather that dislikes landing craft. Harry Webb's people buried the mining charges from the quarry in mathematical patterns across every flat stretch of ground a military mind would choose for a landing zone, each charge slaved to a trigger board built out of a harvest scheduling computer. Our agricultural drones, 600 of them, were fitted with signal repeaters that made each one read as a manned fighter on Vetheri sensors. And the settlers dug, and welded, and carried, and never once asked whether it was hopeless. Because asking whether things are hopeless is simply not a Kestrel custom. I want to set down what the last night before the landing was like, because battles get remembered, and the nights before them get lost, and this one deserves keeping. The children and the elders went into the deep caves in the northern hills that evening, along the old mining roads, carrying blankets and lamps, and enough pie, thanks to Alice Moore's organizing, to survive a 10-year siege. Sijara walked down the whole line of them as they boarded the transports. She knew every child by name. Near the end of the line, a small girl named Poppy Webb, Harry's granddaughter, tugged her sleeve and held up one crumpled paper glider and asked her to keep it for luck. Sijara knelt in the mud, took the glider as though it were made of glass, and gave the girl her notebook in exchange. The notebook, the human rules, the water spirals, all of it, and told her, "Keep this safe in the caves, and if anything happens, learn everything in it, and teach the others." Then she stood up, tucked one crumpled paper glider inside her jacket over her heart, and went back to preparing a battlefield. Later, past midnight, I found her on the garrison wall, looking up at the 3 new stars in our sky that were not stars. I stood beside her, and for a while neither of us said anything, because we had become the kind of people who can share a silence and both know what is in it. Finally she said, "Daniel, I need you to hear one thing before tomorrow. Whatever happens, you did not bring this here. They were always going to come for me somewhere. The only thing you changed is that when they arrived, I was not alone, and I was not small, and I knew what I was. Do not carry tomorrow as your fault. That is an order." I asked her since when she gave the orders around here, and she said, "Since I read the garrison regulations, which technically place the first consultant engineer outside your chain of command," and I laughed, actually laughed, on the wall, under the guns of an empire, because she had planned that joke, prepared it in advance like a field ration, and saved it for the exact moment I would need it most. That is the kind of person the Dominion threw away. On the 8th day, Korath ran out of patience with our silence, and came down to correct us. The landing began at dawn, exactly by the book, and the book betrayed them from the first minute. Their first wave of dropships descended toward the obvious landing plane, and the plane was wrong. The buried charge patterns did not destroy the dropships. Sajara had insisted the patterns be built to disable, to break landing struts and engines, because she said something I will never forget. She said, "They were taught that mercy is weakness, so we will defeat them with mercy, and they will spend 100 years trying to understand it." Ships tipped and sank in engineered mud. Soldiers waded out into a valley where the air itself had turned against them, visibility collapsing as the terraforming array called down fog and shear winds on positions we had mapped to the meter. Their second wave came in smarter, spread wide, and met 600 agricultural drones behaving like a fighter swarm. The cruisers overhead burned ammunition and attention on machines designed to plant grain, while the actual resistance, garrison soldiers and farmer volunteers moving through drainage tunnels Harry Webb had mapped since childhood, appeared behind cleared positions, disarmed stunned Vitheri troops, zip-tied them, treated their injuries, and vanished. We stacked their confiscated weapons in the town square like harvest bales. By the second evening we held 400 prisoners, and their fear was turning into something stranger. They had been told they were coming to destroy monsters, and the monsters kept bandaging them. I should tell one small story from inside those 2 days, because the whole war ended up hinging on things this size. During the tunnel actions on the second day, my team took a position in the eastern drainage system, and among the Vitheri soldiers we disarmed, there was a conscript so young his crest had barely finished forming, a low-caste boy whose unit name was Tech. He had a broken arm from a collapsing wall, and he was certain, absolutely certain, that we were going to end him, because that is what his sermons had promised humans did. Instead, our medic, a calm and immovable woman named Nora Hale, set his arm, splinted it, gave him water, and scolded him for flinching, in the universal tone medics use on all species. The boy watched her work with an expression I have seen on faces at the edge of a changed mind. Then he asked, in broken trade language, why? Why repair an enemy? Nora did not even look up from the splint. She said, "Because you are a person, and I am a medic, and neither of those things stops being true just because someone declared a war." Later, when the prisoners in the holding barn heard Sajara speak from the barricade, witnesses told me it was Tech who stood up first. Tech with his splinted arm, who pressed his good hand flat against the barn wall in the old Vitheri gesture of oath-breaking and oath-making, renouncing one loyalty and choosing another, and that half the barn followed him inside a minute. Empires spend fortunes on weapons. The blow that actually broke the priesthood that day was a splint, a cup of water, and one sentence from a tired medic who would be embarrassed to hear it called history. The counterattacks through those tunnels were the hardest soldiering of my life, and I say that as a man who fought for 30 years. Harry Webb's drainage maps lived in his head, drawn there by a childhood of forbidden exploring, and he walked point for us at 60 years of age, moving through the dark like the boy he had been, whispering the turns. We would surface behind a Vitheri position out of ground their sensors had declared solid, and the settlers fighting beside my soldiers followed a rule Cesara had asked of us all: disable, disarm, restrain, treat. It made everything slower and harder and more dangerous for us, and I want it written plainly that the people of Kestrel's Landing paid extra, in sweat and in risk, to give mercy to an army that had come to erase their neighbor. Ask me why humanity deserves its place among the stars, and I will not point at our fleets. I will point at that. Korath's doctrine had no chapter for any of it. So on the third day, he stopped following doctrine, and that is when it became the fight I still see when I close my eyes. He dropped his remaining strength, everything, directly onto the town itself. Doctrine be hanged, and his elite guard came down through the fog in armor that shrugged off everything the colony could throw. Their objective was the garrison command bunker, because his listening device had told him, months ago, exactly where Cesara worked. The line between them and the bunker was my line. I will not glorify what those hours were. War is not glorious. It is loud, and it is fast, and it takes people. We lost 11 that day. I will write their names at the end of this story, because they are the reason there is an end to this story. We were pushed back to the bunker approach by dusk, and there, in the smoke, with Korath's guard advancing in perfect ancient formation, Sajara did the thing that broke them, and it was not a weapon at all. She walked out. She took the garrison's loudspeaker rig, climbed onto the barricade before I could stop her, and spoke to the advancing Vetheri soldiers in their own high court dialect, the sacred register only nobles are permitted to use, and she said, "I am Sajara, 9th daughter of the Emperor, the one you were sent to erase. Look at me. I have no crest, and I am still here. No ancestors speak in my head, and I can still speak. They told you that without the old ways you are nothing. They told me the same. They were wrong about me. What else were they wrong about?" And the advance stopped. Not all at once, but soldier by soldier, that perfect 10,000-year formation lost its shape, because the troops in it were low-crest conscripts, ration-line sons and daughters, and the abomination on the barricade was saying out loud the question they had carried silently their whole lives. Korath, watching his correction dissolve into doubt, did what frightened priests have always done. He targeted the barricade himself. I saw the aim before I understood it, and I was moving before I understood that either. I reached her in 3 steps and put myself in the way, and the world went white, and then very quiet, and then sideways. I remember the ground. I remember her hands on my face, and her voice, which had never once been anything but steady, not steady at all, saying my name over and over. And I remember, because a soul should be honest at least once, that I finally said the thing I had been a coward about for a year. I told her, right there, leaking onto the soil of Kestrel's Landing, I told her, and her answer is between us, but I will say that I stopped being afraid of anything after I heard it. I did not see the end of the battle. I am told it ended 12 minutes later, when the sky filled with human warships 4 days ahead of schedule, because Peter Grant had spent the week calling in every favor he was owed by every fleet captain in the sector, and Peter is owed favors by everyone. Korath's cruisers surrendered. His own soldiers arrested him. That detail matters. Not humans. His own soldiers. They brought him, bound, through the town square, past the stacked weapons and the treated prisoners and the 11 covered forms that were our cost, and he saw Sajara, kneeling beside my stretcher, filthy and bloodied and unbroken, and he spent his last free words on her. He said, "Whatever they make of you, you will never be anything but a hollow prize." And Sajara stood up, held his gaze, and answered in a voice the whole square heard. She said, "You are right about one thing. I was a prize. He turned me into a person. That is why you lose. That is why you will always lose." I woke up 9 days later in the colony hospital with a rebuilt shoulder, a chest full of medical machinery, and an alien princess asleep in the chair beside my bed with her hand wrapped around 2 of my fingers. The nurse told me she had left that chair exactly 4 times in 9 days, and only because Alice Moore had physically threatened her with a soup spoon. There are many kinds of wealth in this universe. I woke up rich. While I had been sleeping, the galaxy had caught fire, and the fire was made of footage. Someone in the colony, nobody ever admitted who, though Ben Carter whistles suspiciously whenever it is mentioned, had recorded everything. The town meeting where 40,000 farmers voted to defy an empire. The barricade. Sajara in the smoke, crestless and unbowed, asking an army in their own sacred dialect, what else were they wrong about? Korath in the square, and her answer that ended him. The recordings went out with the human fleet's news packets, and then they went everywhere, and there is no priesthood in existence that can burn a story once it learns to travel on its own. On the Dominion's worlds, the effect was an earthquake. The coup was already wobbling, its fleet humiliated by a farming colony, its high speaker arrested by his own conscripts. But it was the footage that killed it. Billions of low-crest Vetheri, standing in their ration lines, watched the discarded daughter stand on a human barricade and refuse to be nothing, and they heard her question, and they began, world by world, shipyard by shipyard, to put down their tools and ask it out loud. The priesthood had spent 10,000 years teaching that the crestless were empty. In 40 days, an empty one emptied their temples. The coup collapsed. The old emperor, weakened and shamed, abdicated in the ancient manner, and the dominion, cracked open and leaderless, did something it had not done in 100 centuries. It looked outside itself for an answer. The delegation that came to Kestrel's landing was nothing like Lord Vess and his oily smile. They came without warships. They landed in the mud without complaint, walked past the memorial we had raised for our 11, and bowed to it, which no Vitheri noble had ever done for any non-Vitheri dead. They were the Reform faction, backed, astonishingly, by the surviving sisters, and led by the second daughter, the one whose face I remembered from the Great Hall a year before, the one who had watched me choose Cesara with something that looked like relief. Her name was Seneth, and her first words to her younger sister were not political at all. She said, "I watched them make you small for 20 years, and I said nothing, because I was a coward with a crown of light. I have not come to ask your forgiveness. I have come to ask for something harder." What they asked, formally, on their knees in a farmhouse parlor, while Alice Moore aggressively served everyone tea, was this: "Come home, take the throne." The succession laws, rewritten in shame and hope by the new assembly, had named her first in line. The people were already painting her face on walls 100 light-years away. The Human Alliance quietly supported it, because a reformer empress raised among humans was the best peace insurance either species could dream of. Everyone in the galaxy, it seemed, had agreed on Cesara's future. Everyone except Cesara. She did not answer them that day, or the next. She walked the colony instead. I watched her stand a long time at the water plant, listening to it breathe. I watched her sit with the settlers' children and fold one more paper glider. And on the third evening she came and sat beside my hospital bed, and she asked me something she had not asked since a shuttle a year and a lifetime ago. She said, "Daniel, tell me what to do." And I understood what was happening, and I refused, and it was the hardest and most important refusal of my life. I said no. I made one choice for you at that ceremony, and it is the last one I will ever make over your head. You are asking me because being told was your whole childhood, and it is comfortable, and it is a cage with soft walls. In this house, nobody kneels, Cesara, not even to me, especially not to me. Whatever you choose, I am with you, but you choose. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, the particular smile she gets when a difficult system finally reveals its pattern to her, and she said, "Then I already know, and I have known since the barricade. I was just afraid it was not allowed." And I told her the thing she had once written in her notebook, that happiness does not require a permit, and she laughed her wind chime laugh, and kissed me, which I mention only because it establishes an important historical timeline, and went to give an empire her answer. She refused the throne. She stood before the delegation, before her sister, before recording drones carrying her words to 100 worlds, and she said, "You are offering me the highest cage in the Dominion, and I decline it. I was made small by a system that sorts souls by the light above their heads. If I take the throne, I become the exception that lets the system live, the empty one who was allowed to rise. One story, one miracle, one door opened and then closed behind me. That is not the turning of the wheel. That is the wheel painted a new color." Instead, she made them a counteroffer, and it was the counteroffer of an engineer. She would serve as first envoy between the Dominion and humanity, architect of the accord, on 3 conditions. First, the caste laws would be dismantled, every one, so that no Vitheri child would ever again be sorted at birth by their crest. Second, the sealed archives would be opened, all 10,000 years, so her people could finally meet their own true history, including the 7 names the priesthood had erased. Third, the crown would go to Seneth, the sister brave enough to kneel in a farmhouse, on the condition that she rule under a constitution written by the low-crest assemblies. "Give the wheel to everyone," Cesara told them, or it was never a wheel at all, only a throne with better marketing. They argued. She out-argued them, She had, after all, trained on human coffee debates, and no Dominion diplomat stood a chance. In the end, they accepted every condition, and Seneth wept, and Alice Moore declared the occasion worthy of pie. I was there, 2 years into the accord, on the day they opened the sealed archives on the throne world, and I will describe it, because no recording carries what the air felt like. The great hall, the same hall where I had once chosen a prize, was filled past its walls, and for the first time in its history, low-crest Vetheri stood inside it, shipwrights and farmers and ration clerks, shoulder to shoulder with nobles whose crests burned uneasy gold. The new assembly had voted that the truth should be read aloud, all of it, and that the reading should begin with the names. Sajara stood where the throne used to be, the throne itself having been moved to a museum with, I am told, her personal and thorough approval, and she read the 7 names her priesthood had erased, one by one, slowly, and after each name she read what that person had done for their people, and how they had died, and who had ordered it. The hall did not stay quiet. Vetheri grief is not quiet. It moves through a crowd, like wind through a field, a low harmonic sound rising from thousands of throats at once, and I stood in the middle of it, one human, in an ocean of a species mourning its own stolen history, and I understood that I was watching a civilization get its soul handed back. When she finished the 7th name, she said only this: they were called empty. The archive you are about to receive contains everything they were. Read it, and decide for yourselves who was empty, them or the silence that swallowed them. Then she stepped down, and the archive was opened to every citizen of the Dominion at once. 10,000 years of buried truth. And the temples that had preached the old lie stood mostly deserted within a season. Not burned, not banned, simply outgrown, which she always said was the only kind of victory that lasts. The accord took 6 years to build, and I will not pretend those years were simple. Old systems die slowly and bite while dying. There were factions to face down, and one attempt on her life at a summit on a neutral station, which failed because by then her personal security consultant was a retired human soldier who had lost her once to a plasma bolt and had strong professional opinions about it never happening again. The attempt itself deserves its footnote in this account, if only because of how it ended. 3 members of a splinter sect, the last true believers of the old priesthood, posing as delegation clerks on a neutral summit station. I spotted the first one because he moved through a crowded corridor without ever once being touched by another person, and no genuine clerk in history has ever possessed that kind of footwork. What followed was brief, professional, and entirely without honor on my part, because I had made Sajara a promise on a barricade, and I do not fight fair where that promise is concerned. But the part worth recording is what she did afterward. She sat with the 3 of them, in their holding cell, for 6 hours, with no guards, over my strenuous objection. Nobody knows everything that was said. What is known is that all 3 testified fully, dismantled their own network with their evidence, and that the youngest of them, years later, completed an engineering certification and now maintains a water reclamation plant on a Dominion border world, and writes to her twice a year. When I asked her what she had said in that cell, she told me, the same thing you said to me on a shuttle once. Nobody is dying. Not today. Not by my order. Not ever. It turns out those words work in any language. That was my job now, officially. Security consultant to the first envoy. Unofficially, the job was standing beside her while she rearranged the galaxy and holding the coffee. We were married in the 4th year of the accord, in the Kestrel's Landing town square, on the exact spot where a defeated priest had called her a hollow prize. Alice Moore arranged the flowers and cried through the entire ceremony while denying that she was crying. Peter Grant was my best man and gave a speech consisting mostly of things I now owe him. Seneth attended with half the reformed court, and 40,000 settlers attended because it was simply understood by all parties that this wedding belonged to them. Sajara wore no crown. She wore a plain gray dress, the same gray she had once hidden in behind a pillar, remade by the colony's tailor into something bright-trimmed and unashamed, because she said the color needed to learn a new job, just like everyone else. That was years ago now. I am writing this at our kitchen table on Kestrel's Landing, on a rainy morning, which on this world describes most mornings. Through the window I can see the street, where a mixed pack of human and Vetheri children, families of the trade mission and the settlers, are attempting to fly paper gliders in weather that has clearly voted against them. Their teacher, when she is home between diplomatic voyages, is the most famous being in 2 civilizations. This morning she is at the stove, losing an argument with a human recipe for pancakes, and the wheel of history is turning quietly on 100 worlds, and the water plant is humming, and the house smells like slightly burned breakfast, and I would not trade any of it for every treasure in that great glittering hall. Before I finish, the names I promised: Ruth Ellery, Samuel Boone, Grace Holt, Edward Finch, Mary Tull, Owen Price, Nathan Cobb, Iris Vale, Albert Dunn, Helen Frost, George Mott, 11 of Kestrel's Landing, who stood between a stranger and an empire because it was the decent thing to do. The first monument of the new dominion, raised by Vetheri hands on their own capital world, bears these 11 human names. Sajara insisted. Nobody dared to argue. Poppy Webb brought the notebook back, by the way. It took her 9 years. She kept it through the caves and through the peace, and she did exactly what she had been told. She learned everything in it and taught the others, and the colony school still uses copied pages from it to this day. She returned the original on her 18th birthday, walked up to our door, handed it over, and informed the first envoy of 2 civilizations that she had been accepted to the Joint Engineering Academy on the Dominion capital, the one Cesara founded, and that she intended to specialize in water systems, and that this was entirely Cesara's fault. Cesara laughed until she had to sit down on the front step. Then she opened the old notebook, wrote one final human rule on the last empty page, tore it out, and gave it to Poppy to keep. I asked her that night what the last rule was. She said, "The same one you gave me on the roof, the one that started everything. Questions are never punished, and neither is truth." They still ask me, after all these years, why I chose her. Diplomats ask, historians ask, Marines at reunions ask, usually around the 3rd round. They want strategy, some brilliant calculation, the soldier who saw it all coming. The truth is simpler and stranger. There was no plan. I just saw someone standing at the back of a room full of people who called her nothing, and I recognized that look, because my whole species wore it once, back when the great powers of the galaxy first looked at humanity and saw primitives who ought to know their place and kneel. We did not kneel. We never learned how. It is our oldest flaw and our finest gift, and the best thing my kind ever did was teach it to someone who needed it. They called her the least of them. She turned the wheel of an empire, and every morning, in a small house on a muddy world at the edge of the map, the most honored soul in the galaxy burns the pancakes and laughs like wind chimes and is home.